Right here.
Yeah, how safe is the president? I worry about his safety.
Well, they better take
That's
good care of
whatever.
him. Yeah, we all do. We all worry. And I'll tell you what, it's a little weird in DC. It is weird in DC with some of the people you worry. You worry all the time. You pay a lot of attention. I like being outside. And so I used to walk between my office building and the Capitol to go vote or go for meetings. I always walked outside. I don't anymore.
If everybody could have a seat, we're gonna go ahead and stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. So don't get too comfortable when you sit down. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now, I want to thank and welcome Congresswoman Hageman for gracing the best town on earth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I so appreciate it. And I love being here. I don't know if it's still the case, but when I was in high school, and my brothers and then my nephews were all wrestlers. And I remember in high school that Sundance, Moorcroft, and Upton, and Hewlett always had such phenomenal wrestling teams. Is that still the case, that wrestling is a big part of the culture up here? I remember that. They were always the toughest wrestlers out there came from this part of the country, and I remember traveling when I was in junior high and high school to come out to the wrestling matches, so it always reminds me of that. It really is wonderful to be back here, and I appreciate you all coming out today. I know it's a little bit difficult. It's a work day. I was just over at the grocery store, so I know that it is a work day and it's at noon. But I try to get out as much as I possibly can when I'm back in Wyoming. Hi, Alan, how are you? I always try to get out and about, and this time we kind of focused on the entire eastern seaboard of the state of Wyoming. So we were in Campbell County yesterday, having a lot of meetings today. We started out early in Sundance, went up to Hewlett, beautiful medical facility up there. That was interesting to see. And then over here, and from here we go to Newcastle, and then we'll head all the way down to Pine Bluffs. And then tomorrow I'm going to be doing a town hall in Platte County and Goshen County. And I made the decision when I ran that I was always going to be accessible, that was very important to me, that as your representative, I was your representative. And that's why I think that these town halls are very important for me to be able to come out and engage. Some of them have been more interesting than others. The two over the last couple of days have been rather quiet, which has been really nice. But at the same time, that's just part of the job. And I do enjoy getting out and having an opportunity to engage with the people that I represent. What I typically do in these is I'm going to give you an overview of the work that we have been doing in Congress, and then I'll spend about half the time opening it up for questions so that you can talk to me about what is on your mind. The House was in session 3 of 4 weeks in February. We were in session last week to the beginning of March, and then this week I'm here in Wyoming, and I head back to DC on Sunday. Last Tuesday, my bill to foster greater economic development in tribal communities passed the House by unanimous consent. When I first came into Congress, I was appointed as the chairman of the subcommittee on Indian and Insular Affairs. And in that capacity, I had an opportunity to learn an awful lot about our 574 federally recognized tribes, as well as working with our territories, the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, etc. But from a tribal standpoint, it became very apparent to me that over the years, we put up a lot of roadblocks and barriers to the success of our tribal communities, simply because in many ways a very paternalistic attitude. And one of the things that we did is in the 1950s we passed a law that our tribes could only lease their trust land for as long as 25 years. Well, when you look at economic development and you look at buildings and building businesses, and when you look at what you need to do, it's hard to even get a loan to build a building that you will only have a lease for 25 years. So we actually had a hearing on this in my first year in Congress, and I remember one of the tribal leaders came in and he testified that you could get permission from Congress to do it for over 25 years, but you had to petition Congress to do it. And in one tribe, they had 2 petitions pending before us. One had been pending for 24 years, and one had been pending for 27 years in order to be able to lease their land for longer than 25 years. So that kind of gives you an idea of a couple of things. One being that Congress does not move very quickly. So I introduced a bill very early in my tenure to increase that to 99 years, which is also the lease term for federal lands, that you can lease federal lands for 99 years. So I introduced that. It passed the House last week. It has both Republican and Democrat support. I am hoping that we can get it through the Senate fairly quickly and get it to the president's desk. I have learned from many of the tribes that this is a game changer for them. This is absolutely a game changer. Bringing in a movie theater, bringing in a distillery. We had that situation out in Oregon. They had been trying to do a distillery for many, many years, but could not get the approval from Congress to be able to do that. So I'm proud of that legislation. It gives them more autonomy and hopefully will allow for additional economic development on our reservations. On Thursday, I voted again to end the shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security. I'm very frustrated right now with where we are. Just so you know, this last year is the first time since I've been in Congress, but actually the first time in decades that we actually negotiated and had 12 appropriations bills, which is the number of appropriations bills that we have, to make it through both the Senate and the House for the first time in decades. And we negotiated both the House and the Senate and the Republicans and the Democrats. Were there things in those bills that I didn't necessarily like? Yeah, but there were also a lot of things that I really did like. And so we negotiated those, and that included the Department of Homeland Security. But in January, the Democrats decided that they were going to pull back and they were not going to agree to vote on the DHS appropriation. Now, they've done that ostensibly on the basis that they don't like ICE and they don't like what's going on with immigration enforcement. Here's the thing about that. In our reconciliation package last July, we fully funded ICE and the Customs and Border Patrol. So by withholding the approval for the appropriations for the Department of Homeland Security, the 3 primary agencies that are being hit are TSA, FEMA, and the Coast Guard. Those are the 3 that are not being funded. Now, I use an airport 2 to 3 times a week. I'm flying somewhere. And I am constantly telling the TSA folks how much I appreciate them. But you know, they went for over a month and a half last fall, and I think they're very frustrated. When I was driving over here today, I heard that there were over 300 that have now resigned. And that is going to have an impact throughout the entire United States. They are dedicated. They are dedicated people. You know, they've always been very friendly as I've gone through the airports, and we need to get this fixed. I don't necessarily see an end to this anytime soon. I hope that the Democrats will come to their senses and we can get something done in the Senate. The House has voted on this twice, but we really do need to make sure that we are funding those agencies. One of the things that has happened over the last 4 years, or happened over the 4 years of the Biden administration, is that with the surge of illegal aliens, we all know some of the consequences of that. We've seen the consequences of it. But there are 2 really very important consequences to that for the state of Wyoming specifically, and it has to do with our trucking industry. We have 2 issues. One is we have states that I believe they have basically CDL mills. New York is one, Maine is another one, Illinois. And California has admitted that they gave 17,000 CDLs to individuals that were not qualified, that did not have the training. What's happening then is we're seeing an increase in truck accidents out on the highway. But another thing is under the Obama administration, there was a rule in place that in order to get a CDL, you had to have English language proficiency. You have to be able to read our signs and know how to drive on our highways. And especially when you consider I-80, the weather on that highway can change at the drop of a hat. We have the high wind warnings, we have the accident warnings, we have the black ice, but all of them are in English in those big billboards that are the digital billboards that are across the highways. There are 13,000 vehicles that cross I-80 every single day. 50% of them are trucks. We have the highest truck fatality rate in the United States, Wyoming does, per 100,000. We have the highest truck fatality rate. And I wasn't paid, this wasn't as much on my radar, but a year ago I have a nephew who's a truck driver. He has a couple of trucks hauling cattle. And he called me and he said, we're seeing a lot of accidents, especially in Nebraska, seem to be getting hit really hard, where people are jumping out of these trucks and they can't speak English, they can't understand, they can't communicate with us. He said, what is going on? And that's when I found out that the Obama administration had done away with the English language proficiency requirements. So I immediately contacted Sean Duffy at the DOT, and within a week he issued a new order requiring English language proficiency. I have also introduced a bill to make this permanent. It really is critical that you be able to communicate when you're driving across our highways. And if you remember last year, this was reported pretty extensively in Cowboy State Daily, the trial of the Haitian national who had that accident on I-80, where he went through an accident site because his testimony was he didn't understand what the signs meant, what was happening. But he drove all the way through an existing accident site, which by the way had been caused by another non-English speaking illegal alien. And he hit 2 EMTs, and one of them he killed instantly, and the other one he broke almost every bone in her body. And they tried him, and I think he got 20 years. They tried him for reckless driving, but he even admitted, I didn't know what was going on, and he was driving through an active site. He was driving at almost 65 miles an hour when he hit those 2 EMTs. So this really is an issue. And then another aspect of this, and this is also dovetails with bringing in a lot of illegal aliens. We have found that there is in New York, there is a CDL truck driving school, allegedly a school, but they are issuing CDLs to only Chinese nationals. It is a school that is solely for purposes of Chinese nationals. Now, we all talk about how China is our biggest geopolitical foe, and when you think about the Cold War, where we're bringing a lot of Russians in and giving them CDLs, where we're literally bringing folks in and having them map our highways for one of our biggest geopolitical foes. But here's something else that has happened in New York. A couple months ago, maybe 6 months ago, there was an enforcement action related to this in Oklahoma. And they found truck drivers that their CDL said no name given for the name. So what's happening is they're bringing in photographs of individuals, they're taking them to the CDLs where they're selling these CDL licenses, and they're literally issuing CDLs without anybody taking any testing, without any training whatsoever. But then that brings us to the next issue, and then New York claims that those are valid driver's licenses, even if they say no name given on them. But here's the next part of this. So I've been meeting with the Wyoming Trucking Association, and this is such an important issue for us, for our country. And they started talking to me about what are called chameleon truck driving companies. Have you ever heard of chameleon truckers? These are companies that are owned, and they might have 15 trucks or 27 trucks. There was one last week, they found out in Minnesota, I think it had 149 trucks. They get lots of violations. They don't comply with the rules, and they just slap a new DOT number on the side and keep going. The accident a couple of months ago with in northern Indiana, where they killed those 4 Amish gentlemen, that was a chameleon truck driving company being driven by an illegal alien who did not speak English from Kyrgyzstan. He was from Kyrgyzstan. So one of the bills that I have introduced is called the SAFE Act, and the purpose of this is to give our DOT more authority to actually deal with these chameleon trucking companies to try to get them off the road. Again, this is absolutely a safety issue. What they're doing is and it's also from the standpoint of, I think trucking is a very important industry, and I think truck drivers are an extremely important part of our economy. I want more people to go into trucking. I want more young people to become truck drivers. We have a shortage. There's no question we have a shortage. But they have so undermined what you can earn in the truck driving industry that a lot of people have had to leave. Since I started introducing these bills and we started getting a crackdown on these, wages for our truck drivers are actually going up. And I think that that's a really good thing. So one of the other things they do in these chameleon trucking companies is they'll put 4 people in a truck and they'll have them travel the country literally nonstop, 24 hours a day. They're paying them almost nothing. They're undercutting our truck drivers. So I'm working with the Wyoming Trucking Association, the American Trucking Association, and Teamsters to actually try to address this and get these folks off of our road. And I think in the long run, we're all going to be better for it. Some of the other things that I wanted to talk to you about, so the chameleon truck drivers, the SAFE Act is HR 7539, and I'm actually hoping we can get some bipartisan support on that and move that fairly quickly. Another issue that I know is very important to this area with your national forests, and I was being asked some questions about your rare earth deposits that you have over here, the access to the National Forest Service lands. In 2001, one of the very last things that Bill Clinton did on his way out of office was he adopted the Clinton roadless rule. That was the largest rulemaking in U.S. history at the time. It denied access, management, and use to 58.5 million acres of National Forest Service lands, including 3.2 million acres right here in the state of Wyoming. Well,
the new store. This is the one-stop shop. We have a pharmacy. We have a bootlegger's liquor. The deli, the food that you can get at a lunchtime is so amazing. The coffee shop. Certain Friday mornings, there's 30 people sitting here in all these chairs. This is the hub for people to come and visit, have their coffee, have their donut. It's amazing what this area has done. Totally amazing.
First of all, I believe it was absolutely unconstitutional. It is not for an administrative agency to be making that kind of a regulation. Congress is the one that has to be making those kinds of decisions. But it was also contrary to the 1897 Organic Act. Our Forest Service lands and our national grasslands were put within the purview of the USDA, not the Department of Interior, because they were to be managed more from a commodity standpoint, a continuous supply of timber, a continuous supply of water, access for mineral rights, access for grazing, all of those things. That is why they were put within the USDA. And then we also have the Forest Management Act, and under the Forest Management Act, every single national forest that we have throughout the United States is supposed to be managed as a unit. In other words, the decisions that are made that are going to apply to our national forests here do not apply. They're very different than our national forests in New Mexico. They're different hydrology, different weather patterns, different vegetation, different trees, all different kinds of things. So when Congress created the National Forest Service, the other thing that they did is they wanted each national forest, each forest, individual forest, to be managed based upon what that forest needed. The roadless rule obviously dramatically changed that. And since the roadless rule went into effect, 9 of the 10 most catastrophic forest fires that we've had in the United States since the creation of the Forest Service have happened since the roadless rule. That fire that we had in 2024 in the Bighorns over by Sheridan, that fire, and this gives you an idea of the amount of fuel that was up there in that national forest. That fire burned 25,000 acres in 3 hours. Wow. That thing ran so hot and so fast, there was absolutely nothing that they could do. And that gives you an idea. Now, are there areas that should be roadless? Absolutely, and I'm perfectly comfortable with that. But I want people like you, I want the communities, I want the people who know that forest on the ground to be the ones who are making those kinds of long-term decisions. So I have introduced a bill to repeal the roadless rule. Now, this administration is also doing it regulatorily through the APA, but I want to make sure that this does not happen again. This is not the way that our forests should be managed. This is a resource that needs to be managed for the benefit of everyone, and the roadless rule has really wreaked havoc over the last 25 years since it has been in place. One of the other things is we're still working on the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill was supposed to be reauthorized in September of 2023. The Farm Bill has become one of the biggest pieces of legislation that we ever deal with. And about 80% of it deals with welfare type programs, SNAP, women, infant, and children, those kinds of things. And about 20% of it deals with actual ag issues. It's very complicated. There are a lot of different constituencies that are a part of it. I have not been a part of actually drafting and working on it intimately because I'm not on the Ag Committee. I'm Natural Resources and Judiciary. But it finally came out of committee last week. I think that they had almost 24 hours or 30 hours of debate on that bill, and not over a period of time. They stayed all night. They looked awfully tired when they came out of the room the next day, but they worked on that and worked that bill over, and it should be coming out to the floor before too long. I am hopeful. I know that our farmers especially are very interested. I think there are some good provisions in there, some modernization of some of the programs that they rely on, but that is something that we're hoping we can get that going. One of the other things that I have done since I've been back in Congress is I've worked with my various communities in the state of Wyoming to do what's called directed funding. And sometimes we have an opportunity to go to the various appropriations committees and identify specific projects that we would like to have funded. In Wyoming, in my first year in Congress, I was able to get $14 million for projects here in Wyoming. The Rock Springs Bitter Creek project. I have worked to try to help and shore up our airports, to get funding for our airports. And then this past year, I got $25 million for the state of Wyoming, including $14 million for the tunnel collapse on the Fort Laramie Canal that serves both eastern Wyoming and western Nebraska. I worked with Nebraska on that. We got $3 million to increase the height of the air traffic control tower at Natrona County Airport. If you go there, you can see that you're kind of surprised that that is an actual air traffic control tower. It's not very tall. And they're going to start restricting what kinds of planes we can bring in if we're not able to address that. So those are the kinds of things that we do to try to make sure that we're addressing specific needs of our communities, because sometimes that can be difficult for these communities to have a voice, and I want to make sure that they do. So if you are aware of things here in Upton or in your communities that you think might be a candidate for that, you need to get a hold of Nicholas in my office. Although I think that we get 12 to 14, I can only ask for 12 to 14 or 15 projects. This year we have over 50, which I think in many ways is good. But the first year that I was there, we got a hold of the state. We called up the state and said, do you have any directed funding projects? And they said, what are you talking about? And they had not heard of it. They didn't even know that this was available. And so we got a hold of the Department of Transportation, and then we had also had some information from some communities that we knew that they needed some assistance. I mean, it can be things for like fire hydrants that need to be replaced. All of this stuff can get terribly, terribly expensive, especially for some of these smaller communities. I want to touch briefly on Iran. One of the things that I was doing back there, I didn't mean to be rude for those of you who came in here a little bit early, but we've had a lot of inquiries about Iran, and I needed to get a letter out so that we could start telling people what my position is. I'm going to date myself a little bit, but I remember the 1979 Iranian Revolution. I was a junior in high school. And I think it was probably because it was one of the first worldwide geopolitical events that really struck me, that I can really remember it happening in real time. But one of the things that struck me was how, especially for the women and for everybody in that country, that was a very modern society. And I don't know how many of you knew this. My older siblings were all at the University of Wyoming in the 1970s. We had a phenomenal petroleum engineering program at UW. We had a lot of Iranian students. They came to the University of Wyoming for their education because of what was going on in Iran, and they were obviously, a world power at that time of producing oil. And they sent a lot of their students to the University of Wyoming, and a lot of them stayed here. A lot of them married and stayed here in the United States. I know of several. But then the Iranian Revolution happened. And I was watching a documentary a couple weeks ago right after this all started, so it wasn't a couple of weeks ago. And it was a documentary about Iran in 1978. So it was right before the revolution. And it was just about what life was like in Tehran and Iran. And I remember seeing all these young girls that were just a little bit older than me, and they looked just exactly like we did at that time. They had their little plaid mini skirts and their little go-go boots and their long hair and their little sweater vests, and they're running around doing whatever we did, in their communities. And it was talking about the life of the Persians in Iran. And then their lives changed instantaneously. And I think that's the thing that struck me so much, is how the women were so utterly affected by everything, being pulled out of school. And so I've watched with great interest what has happened with Iran over the years. It's been something that I have really paid a lot of attention to. And I have felt that unless we took out Iran, unless we took out the Ayatollahs, we were never going to have stability and certainty in the Middle East. They have been a world sponsor of terrorism. Their view of the world, their view of relationships, their view of freedom is something that has just always struck me, that we cannot have that level of terrorism and hatred in a country of 80 million people that controls the kind of geopolitical areas that it does. And so I think that this was a long time in the coming. In my mind's eye, I can remember the Beirut bombing of our military installation there and watching them bring the bodies of our soldiers out. I remember the holding of the hostages in Iran for the 444 days that they did and the day that they were released. And I think that things are going to be difficult. I think that there can be some difficult things that may happen, although we don't have a shortage of oil. I can't stand up here and explain why I've seen gasoline prices spike in the last couple of days, because we don't have a shortage of oil in this country right now. I say we need to build more refining capacity, but even that, we don't have a shortage. And so I think that there are potentially going to be some challenges, especially as we watch the stock market kind of ping pong back and forth. But I think that we just kind of have to be tough, and we have to recognize that sometimes there's going to be some disruptions, but in the long run, I think we're all going to be better off, and I think in the Middle East, we're going to be better off. I voted against a war powers resolution to end the hostilities against Iran. There was an introduction last week to block President Trump from being able to engage in Iran. I voted against that for many reasons. One is that I have serious questions as to the constitutionality of the War Powers Act, but even setting that aside, under the War Powers Act, he had to notify the Gang of Eight, which he has done, which is a bipartisan committee in the House and the Senate. He did that before any bombing began, and then he's got 60 days. And whether this will take longer than 60 days, I don't think that it will. I will tell you what I think is going to take an awful long time, and what is more of an uncertainty or an unknown to me is how we rebuild that country. And I'm not saying we in the sense that we need to be in there with boots on the ground, but when you look at just the massive bombing campaign that is taking place and the infrastructure that is being destroyed, my bigger concern is the vacuum. My bigger concern is who's going to step up. Who is the person that can lead the country during this time of crisis and attempt to rebuild? I don't know how many of you read this last fall. I'm a water attorney, so I always pay a lot of attention to this. But I think one of the things that might have been the instigator behind the uprising in January of this year is they're running out of water. Tehran has been running out of water. They have a huge reservoir that, because of their mismanagement and because they dedicate all of their funding to terrorism and bomb making and things like that, they've never taken care of their infrastructure. Last fall, they were talking about how they were going to have to evacuate Tehran, the largest city in Iran. They were going to have to evacuate it because they're out of water. So when I think about rebuilding, how do you rebuild something like that when you're in a desert setting? And that's probably a bigger concern to me, is being able to provide that stability that is going to allow them to come in and rebuild what I think is going to be quite a task to do that. The other thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit is some more of the bills that I have done, that we have been working on. In natural resources, I'm the chair of Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries, so I oversee the Endangered Species Act, and I oversee the United States Bureau of Reclamation and Water Infrastructure. And there's a couple of things I've really focused on, and that is modernizing the Endangered Species Act so that it actually meets the needs today. You know, I think a lot of people, when they think of the ESA, not in this room, but back east, they think, well, the Forest Service is out there and they're protecting the grizzly bears and they're protecting the whooping crane and all those things. They're not. It's our game and fish departments. It's the state folks that manage these, even if they're listed under the Endangered Species Act. I have a bill to delist the grizzly bear. It was listed as threatened in 1975. By the late 1990s, we had met all of the recovery goals of over 500 grizzly bears in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. We have over 1,100 bears. They've entirely saturated their historical range in northwestern Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho, and now they're moving into areas that are well outside of their habitat, and that's why you're seeing some of the conflicts that you do. The Game and Fish Department has done a phenomenal job of bringing back the grizzly bear, and that's who did it. It wasn't the Fish and Wildlife Service. We have invested over $50 million on that one species, and we have 9 full-time people in the Game and Fish Department that work on grizzly issues. That bear, and the Fish and Wildlife Service has tried 3 times to delist it. A judge out of Montana relists it every single time. We are fully capable of managing and protecting the grizzly bear so that it is not in danger of extinction, which is what the standard is. And so I'm hoping that we can get that done. I keep pushing to get the grizzly bear delisted. But some of the other things that we're doing is modernizing the ESA so we don't get wrapped up in these kinds of things again. We need to manage these species holistically. And when you manage for the benefit of one species at the expense of everything else, it affects your elk populations, your moose populations, your deer populations, your antelope, everything else. And that isn't the way that you manage an ecosystem. We need to do better at this. We also have done the SPEED Act, which is to streamline permitting. That's, I know what you guys have all been through with the Forest Service up here with some of the mineral stuff, and we need to streamline permitting. The fact is, our companies are very, very, very good at exploring and producing oil and gas, coal, other minerals, bentonite, and still protecting the environment at the same time. It has really become embedded in our culture. It's embedded in our business culture. It's embedded in our communities, and it's really what people want. But we need to use common sense with this permitting. So one of the other things that I've done is there are constraints. There are many administrations. We know that there's been a war on coal. There's been a war on fossil fuels for quite some time. And so you think that there might be just one bill or one statute that's done that. What I have found is that Clinton, Obama, and Biden, they impose layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of barriers, so that when we get one off, or we pull one out, or we get a different executive order, or we do a different regulation, or even if we do a bill. We did a lot of reform in the reconciliation package in July. There's 5 more that pop up that make it difficult for our companies to actually go out and produce.
In addition to the weekly printed version of the newsletter journal, we also promote our community and share important information on our award-winning website, newslj.com, and in our weekly email newsletter, Nuke Now. We also connect with readers through various social media platforms and invite you to check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can even take a look at a recent meeting of the City Council, School Board, or County Commission on our YouTube channel. We do hope that you will go to newslj.com and subscribe today, and we look forward to making all of our great content available to you. But regardless of your level of support, we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for doing your part to preserve a free and independent local press.
So right now, we had a hearing last week in our Minerals Committee about exploration. And there are rules in effect, there are statutes in effect that make it actually extremely difficult to explore for all kinds of minerals. You're limited to 5 acres, but that's not really how you can determine what the quality or quantity of minerals are in a particular place. So I've worked with these mineral companies, and I have introduced the Domestic Ore Act, which will streamline the mineral exploration phase. All we're doing is increasing the acreage to 25 acres from 5 acres. Still a relatively small footprint, but it allows them, and I asked very specifically, is 25 acres enough? Do we need 30? Do we need 75? And they're like, 25 acres is a life changer for us to be able to do the exploration that we need to do. So I've introduced that. Another barrier has been that the cost for coal. The Mineral Leasing Act requires mining companies to make bonus bid payments to the federal government for the right to mine coal on a federal lease tract. And the federal regulations, again put in by agencies, require that the bonus payments are made in 5 installments. 20% due at the time of lease and 20% each year for the next 4 years. These are millions of dollars. When they make these bonus bids, it is millions of dollars. But it's all front-ended as to when it's all front-loaded as to when they have to pay it. And it could be 10 years before they earn the revenue back. So it has become a barrier where our coal companies are not bidding on this because they don't have the money or the wherewithal to invest 40 or 50 or $60 million and not be able to recover any of that for 7, 8, or 9 years. So I have done a bill that it's the same amount of money, they still have to pay the same amount for this, but it's over a longer period of time, so it's not so front-end loaded. So it matches your expense with your revenue, so that they have the expense for the bonus bid, but it's at the time that they're actually earning revenue on these particular projects. So that is something that has been, we've worked with the industry, and that's something that they say is just extremely important for them to be able to be able to produce. And they're worried that despite the resources and reserves that we have, because these regulations and restrictions have been in place for so long, we're going to run out of coal. Not because we don't have it, not that we don't have the mines in place, but because we can't produce it, because we just don't have that ability. So that brings me to one of the last things I'm going to talk about, and this is HJ Res 130. Under the Biden administration, they tried to place a moratorium on coal production in the Powder River Basin in Montana and Wyoming. And this was done by Tracy Stone Manning, the head of the BLM. She issued 2 resource management plans, the Miles City RMP to cover the Montana side of the PBR, and the Buffalo RMP to cover the Wyoming PBR. And basically, I mean, we produce 40% of the coal in the United States. These snowstorms and ice storms that they've had in the Midwest and on the East Coast, 100% oil and gas and coal is what kept the lights on and the heat on. There was nothing else. That was 100% during that period of time. This is so critically important not only to Wyoming, but to the United States. But we have this thing called a CRA, the Congressional Review Act, and it's been used very sparingly. It was adopted in 1996. What it does is it allows us, as Congress, the actual lawmakers, we can nullify an executive branch regulation under specific rules. We have to follow a very strict process, and we have to follow a very strict timeline. But if we pass a CRA, it nullifies the regulation, and they can't ever adopt a similar regulation in the future. So for the first time in history, we issued a CRA on the Miles City RMP and on the Buffalo RMP, and we got both of them nullified, and they were signed into law by the president in December. So it was a very, very big deal. Tracy Stone Manning, when she was contacted about this, because she thought that they were bulletproof. She thought that she had single-handedly stopped coal production in the Powder River Basin, and she was madder than a wet hen when we used the CRA, because it had never been used like this before. We actually we had to go to the GAO, the Government Accountability Office. We had to go to them, and they had to give us permission to do this, but all that does is make it so that it really shores it up if it's ever challenged in court. But we did that, and we've done several others. We've now nullified over 20 regulations that were adopted by the Biden administration, and I am now combing the books, and I'm going after the ones that were issued in the 1990s and before that, because there's one trigger. We have 60 days to do a CRA, but it is not triggered until whatever it is that the agency did presents that action to Congress. Well, most of these things, they never thought that we would have the ability to nullify them, so the administrative agencies never presented these things to Congress. So I'm looking at regulations that went into effect under Clinton and under Obama that they never presented to Congress, and I'm going to try to CRA them. Here's the benefit: we only have to have 51 votes in the Senate. So we can actually, we don't have to comply with the filibuster. So that's a pretty exciting thing. The last thing I want to talk about is not only do we do the legislative stuff and the committee stuff, we work directly for all of you. The constituent services are extremely important, and I have 2 staff members back here. Trinity Lewis, I know none of you know. And then I brought Tristan Justice with me. He's my comms director. He came out from Washington, D.C. He loves this area out here and has had a good time with us. But we do case files. And so if you're having a problem with the IRS, with the VA, Social Security Administration, the BLM, the Forest Service, whatever federal agency it is, if you're having a problem, you need to contact our office. We'll open a case file, we'll try to get to the bottom of it and try to fix it for you. So it can be something that you're having a problem with the BLM with a gate. It could be something that simple. But it also is that you didn't get your tax refund, or if you're a veteran, you're not getting your benefits. The Social Security Administration has the numbers wrong. We have resolved over 4,500 cases on behalf of Wyoming constituents in 3 years, and we have returned $15.5 million to individuals in the state of Wyoming. It might be a $300 tax return or a $5,000 tax return or reimbursement for travel for VA services. But we've returned $15.5 million, and I'm very, very proud of that. That's my team. Trinity is really aggressive on those things. And so if you have an issue with a federal administrative agency, get a hold of my office and we'll see what we can do for you. I don't know what time it is because I forgot to bring my phone up here, but I think that that's about a good time to end, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
You're doing so fine.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. My name is Fonzie Haskell. I'm actually from Moorcroft, and I appreciate you bringing up the grizzly being listed. That's important to me because I serve on the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission.
Good.
I represent District 6, which is Crook, Weston, and Niobrara County, so I represent all of you as well. But I appreciate your work on that, and to echo what you said about the department, they are going above and beyond to be compliant.
They are.
In that manner, and I think a lot of the other western states aren't aware of what an issue it is for us in Wyoming.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they're bringing that to light, and I think with your bill. Another thing is where do you stand with the Seminole Pump Project taking place south of Casper?
I don't know about the validity of that. I'm gonna have to study it more. I know what you're talking about,
Sure.
and that is generating electricity by pumping water up and doing it. You know, I love the idea of hydropower. One of the things that scares me to death is in Oregon and Washington and California, they're trying to get rid of it, which is going to affect northwestern Wyoming. I love hydropower. I don't know about the feasibility of what it is that they're doing with that project. I don't know if it is a matter of getting money for a project that isn't going to work. Maybe it is going to work. I need to study it more, but I don't want it to affect anything on what we're doing, either in terms of storage or in terms of protecting those resources for the Kendrick project for that one, although it does store water sometimes for the North Platte or the Warrenack contractors. But I just want to make sure that we are protecting our existing infrastructure for our existing users as well. What are your thoughts?
Well, I need to do more research as well. I was just recently made light of it at a recent commission meeting, I guess last fall. It kind of scared me. Looks like a lot of the power is not even going to stay in Wyoming, it's leaving the state. I too am a fan of hydroelectric. I grew up in southwest Wyoming, right on the Flaming Gorge, and I know that's very, very important. But, you know, I want to make sure that the resources are protected. It's potentially going to affect Bighorn sheep winter range, a good portion of that river. That's a very...
Does it increase evaporation?
I believe it will.
Yeah, and that's a concern.
Right.
I mean, they already had to build a 1 million acre foot reservoir to serve 25,000 acres. I don't know that we want additional evaporation off of it.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I need to do more research, but what I'm seeing right now, I'm not a fan of.
Okay, all right, we'll look into it more. Thank you. Who else? Anyone else? Yes, Alan.
And talking about water issues, what's your thoughts on the Colorado River and all the lawsuits that are
It's a mess.
kind of pending on that? I agree.
It's a mess, and it has been for a long time. Yeah, you know, I worked on that river quite a bit, and I think that the sad part is, maybe not the sad part, but that was the first compact ever written distributing water across state lines, 1922. And I know that they negotiated it for a long time, but we know so much more now than they did then in terms of hydrology. I'm not being critical of anyone, but if you were going to start on a river, I think I would have started on one that wasn't quite that big. Although they were having the battles, I still think they would have been better off going to the United States Supreme Court and having a decree fought out over that rather than a compact. You know, I am of the position that is a non-depletion compact and not a delivery compact. The downstream states are going to disagree with me on that. They believe that we are required to deliver 7.5 million acre feet at Lee's Ferry, or 75 million acre feet over a 10-year period. I disagree. We are entitled to 14% of the upper basin, 7.5 million, and my position is until Wyoming uses its 14%, we don't have a delivery obligation. That was split between the upper basin and the lower basin. And in the upper basin, we've gone in and we've done an upper basin agreement as well, and we get 14% of that water. I'll tell you what I have done is I think that the lower basin states have got to start they need to stop pretending that the Colorado River is going to solve their water problems. The state of California has the same water infrastructure in place today with 40 million people that they had in the 1960s with 16 million people. They have utterly and completely failed the citizens of California because they refuse to build infrastructure. They would rather steal from us than steal from Arizona. And Arizona likes to steal from them too. But that is what we have to do, and what I have done with the staff for water, wildlife, and fisheries, and I've even gone and talked to some of the Democrats, and I have said flat out, I will try to help you to find a way to build additional infrastructure in California, but you are going to have to build additional infrastructure in California. You need to do desalination. Israel gets 100% of its water from desal. They are going to have to build desal plants, they are going to have to build additional reservoirs, and they are going to have to maintain the ones that they have. And California has gotten away for a long time without doing it, but you know what they're doing? They're basically doing away with their ag industry and doing away with irrigation in order to meet municipal demands, and that is insane. That is insane. The Imperial Valley has been affected out in California as a result of this. They're drying up acres and acres of land that could be used for strawberries and pineapples and avocados and garlic. And I mean, anything you want to grow, you could grow out there. And they're taking water away because they will release 50% of their water out of their reservoirs for in-stream and dump it into the ocean. So the problem with the Colorado River Compact is too many people have become convinced that if they wait it out long enough, their political career will be over and they won't have to make a difficult decision. And that's where we are on that. I don't know if the Bureau is going to have to step in and actually come up with an agreement that they force down everybody's throat. Although I'll tell you that what I'm hearing is that the biggest impediment to an agreement right now is the state of Colorado. That is the one that is balking at entering into an agreement. And Wyoming has been at the table. We have negotiated in good faith. We have been willing to do pilot projects where we are allowing, we're not irrigating, we're allowing that water to go downstream as long as we're protecting our water rights, but we have been doing pilot projects. The other states need to step up. One of the things they're gonna have to do is they're gonna have to build additional infrastructure. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I'm James Worrell. I live in Newcastle. And just for the past several years of watching what goes on, in Congress and the things, I think about it always going back to Trey Gowdy and watching the investigations that he did and all the others that have been. And we see just hours and hours of it and presented to us, but we see no prosecution.
No progress.
So I just wondered, are we going to ever see any prosecution after this? The things going on in Minnesota are abomination to all of our taxpayers.
And there are a lot of people, including probably the governor and the attorney general, that ought to go to prison as well. I'll tell you what I think has been happening. Yes, we are. But we have exposed a lot, and we've actually gotten some changes in some extremely important things, not necessarily prosecutions. I won't go through all of it. One of them that we were able to expose was a worldwide, essentially a worldwide censorship program that censored conservative media. We were able to expose that through the Judiciary Committee, and we got it entirely disbanded. This was an organization that controlled hundreds of billions of dollars worth of advertising money. And with what we were able to expose and go after them for antitrust violations, we were able to get the entire thing disbanded. So those are some of the wins that we do win. And it was a very, very important one. As far as these prosecutions, I'll tell you what I think has happened in part of it. I know people are frustrated with Pam Bondi for not prosecuting some of these things, but what is the jurisdiction where she's going to have to bring some of these lawsuits? It's the federal district court in Washington, D.C.
Gotta move it out of there.
And they can't. So what I found out 2 days ago, and my team is looking into it right now, this is the first time I've ever talked about this. I just uncovered this 2 days ago. Sometimes I don't sleep, so I read a lot. And there is a nationwide jury nullification program where they are training people to become jurors and go in and nullify the ability to prosecute someone for committing a crime. I just came across this 2 days ago. Got it to my team. We're working with the Judiciary Committee.
Financing it.
That's exactly part of it. And that's why we need to keep coming back to RICO and conspiracy type claims. We've got to do this. But I'm going to give you an example of a direct nullification of a jury verdict. In Minnesota, going back to what you said, there have been prosecutions in Minnesota. There's over 75 people who have been prosecuted for the Feeding Our Future program. That was about a $250 million fraud program that started during COVID. There are other prosecutions that have taken place and people have been prosecuted for stealing money. One of them was a woman and a man, and they were the same kind of people that we see all of the fraud with right now. They did get them convicted. They stole $7.5 million, and they were convicted by a jury. It was basically an open and shut case. I read about the nature of the evidence. The evidence was overwhelming, and they prosecuted them. The jury was out a matter of hours, and they found them guilty. A state district court judge reversed that conviction about a month ago. And she said, yes, the jury found them guilty, but they could have found them not guilty too. So I'm just going to find them not guilty. Well, I'm going to tell you what, and I'm not even afraid of saying this. She's on the take.
Yep.
She's absolutely on the take. She's totally corrupt. Now, they've appealed that, and when it goes up on appeal, I think that'll be reversed in part for this. You cannot reverse jury verdicts. Under our form of jurisprudence, if a jury rules on something, the ability to get that reversed, even if they're wrong, she reversed a jury verdict, and I think that tells you something. A lot of those cases in Minnesota are going to have to be prosecuted there. So if you are looking at being the prosecutor and bringing these actions, one of the things you have to think about is, what can I do to get a conviction? That's why that was a eureka moment for me the other night when I found that information about how there was actually an official jury nullification training program for people if they are ever on a jury, what they can do to prevent the conviction of certain people. So, during the whole thing with what they did with Trump spying and the Russia collusion hoax and all of those things, and they're spying on Carter, was it Carter Page? I think it was who they spied on. Do you know only one person was convicted for that? And it was a guy named Kleinsmith. He's an attorney. He worked for the agency, the FBI. He falsified a document. Carter Page was a CIA asset. And when the email was sent to that agency saying, has Carter Page worked for you? The CIA sent it back and said, he is an asset. Kleinsmith altered that document and put in the word not. And that's why they were able to go to the FISA court and do what they did, get the warrant, because had he not falsified that document, the FISA court never would have given him a warrant. He was prosecuted, nailed for a misdemeanor, was disbarred for a matter of months. He's back practicing law, probably making millions of dollars a year. But that's Washington, D.C. So do I think that this nullification stuff is real? I do. And we need to get to the bottom of it. And that was just in the last couple of days that's happened. I'm very glad that we found it, because this needs to be exposed. I say sunshine is the best disinfectant. If we can expose it and show what's happening, we can fight against it. I want the convictions. I want Mayorkas to be perp walked from here to the end of time. That man lost hundreds of thousands of children to sex trafficking. The things that he did are just crimes against humanity. But we also have to be willing to take these things up, and we've got to have a DOJ that will. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Where do you stand on the Save America Act with the voting ID, and also how do you feel about hand counting votes?
The latter, I don't know how to do that. The former, obviously, I'm a strong supporter of it, and I am a co-sponsor of that, the Save America Act. Chip Roy is a very good friend. I think that it's absolutely something that we have to do. The idea that we do not have voting ID requirements, Somalia requires you to show an ID to be able to vote in their elections. I want to make it easy to vote and really hard to cheat. And we do know, we are well aware. I think that there are things that are coming out of Georgia from 2020 and out of Arizona right now from 2020 and 2024, where there were a lot of shenanigans that have gone on. I have been a strong proponent and advocate for a long, long time. I'd like to see even Wyoming, our voting period shortened up. We don't need 6 weeks or 4 weeks of early voting. 10 days, I could probably live with that. I'd rather have a day of voting, the voting day, but if it has to be over a period of time, you know, it was, when I ran, it was what, 7 weeks, like the 10th of July for the primary, the 3rd week of August. Why do we need, 7 weeks of voting? The other thing that I know is that if they don't declare a winner the night of the election, my side always loses. My side always loses. You can see it, you can watch, you can go back and watch the reruns. If they don't call the election that night, we lose, because they know how many votes they need. We lost the Laxalt to the Senate election, 4 years ago in Las Vegas. And they released the Secretary of State the Friday before the Tuesday election, released the numbers so that the Democrats knew how, and Laxalt was winning. And they knew how many votes they had to go get, and they went and got those votes. And that's all that it took. And those are the kinds of shenanigans that I think have really undermined our elections. We've got to shore them up. But that's gonna be a battle royale. I know, one of the problems that we have, and I know people are really mad about this, I don't know that if we have the votes in the Senate to override the filibuster. I don't know that we have those votes. So.
You have time for 2 more questions.
Yes, sir.
I believe there was cheating in the election. So what happens legislatively if people were installed and not elected by the people that they actually got across? How do you handle that?
So courts are risk averse. They just are. Judges are risk averse. And they are never going to want to be seen to go in and change the outcome of an election, right, wrong, or indifferent. So the point that I've always made, and when I was first elected in 2022, when I first went back to DC in 2020, that they can't count after Election Day. It was changing the way that they were doing things in Wisconsin so that they couldn't cheat. So the 2024 election, while it wasn't perfect, they fixed an awful lot of things. But there's 2 things that I want to tell you that I think happened in 2020 and in the 40 years before that. In the mid-1980s, there was a federal district court judge in New Jersey who issued a consent decree that Republicans were not allowed to be poll watchers. Democrats could be. So Democrats were in the room in Georgia, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Florida, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana. The Republican Party was disallowed. Every 5 years, that consent decree came back up for renewal, and he kept renewing it. And finally, after 2010, like 2012 or 13, he died. Thank goodness. Don't mean to be mean, but he died. So they went back to another appointed judge in that district, a judge who had been appointed by President Barack Obama. And they went back in for their consent decree renewal to prevent Republicans from being poll watchers. And he said, "Are you crazy? This is absolutely unconstitutional." And he refused to reauthorize that consent decree. Do you want to know the first year Republicans were allowed as poll watchers since the mid-1980s? 2020. So we saw all kinds of things, Georgia, the double counting of the ballots, the different things that went on. That wasn't the first year those things happened, but it was the first year we were in the room to expose them. And we had no muscle memory. I remember I went to be trained to be a poll watcher, And everybody's like, oh, we really don't know what to do, but here's an attorney, call in. But the other thing that the RNC did is they trained a lot of attorneys so that if there was a discrepancy in a ballot in Georgia at 10 o'clock at night, they had an attorney on the phone and they were in that room and they were dealing with it in front of judges right then. So they have dramatically changed the way that they approach this. Is it ideal? Is it perfect? No, it isn't, but it is better. But I cannot overstate the significance of what that district court judge did in New Jersey, basically disenfranchising the Republican Party from being able to engage at the polls. It was very, very significant. And that changed for the 2020 election. So, and also I do think that the RNC has taken this much more seriously, and they have a whole slew of attorneys as well as fighting the battles on a state-by-state basis. One other thing that happened in the 2020 election was Mark Zuckerberg invested $500 million, and I would recommend that you read a Times Magazine article, Times Magazine. There was an article that came out in February of 2021, and it talked about how Mark Zuckerberg saved democracy. He invested $500 million in a Get Out the Vote campaign for Democrats. In places like Wisconsin, they actually invested, they bought an RV, put $300,000, they bought an RV, and it was a roving polling station, but it only went to Democrat areas. That was the kind of stuff that happened to us in 2020 that we didn't know about until they were stupid enough to publish that article in February, might have been March, but February of 2021. I'd encourage you to read it because it will make you sick to your stomach to realize what happened in that election with this kind of money. He now claims to have a different viewpoint on the world, but it hurt us. It hurt us. So I think we're done. We're ready to go, or one more question, it's whatever.
Want to speak in one more question?
Sure, right here.
Yeah, how safe is the president? I worry about his safety.
Well, they better take good care of him. Yeah, we all do. We all worry. And I'll tell you what, it's a little weird in DC. It is weird in DC with some of the people you worry. You worry all the time. You pay a lot of attention. I like being outside. And so I used to walk between my office building and the Capitol to go vote or go for meetings. I always walked outside. I don't anymore. I stay in the basement. I go through the tunnels because I think that there's just a higher risk right now for all of us. It's scary to be out at night. I don't mean out walking because I wouldn't do that anyway, but even restaurants, I don't hardly make eye contact anymore because you worry about that people will recognize you.
What do you think about the Secret Service? Do you think they're doing it?
I think they're better. I still can't figure out Butler, and I still can't figure out why we don't have any information about it. I do know that a gentleman by the name of Kafari, he is an IG inspector that I have become very close friends with. He is investigating and he has information about the Department of Homeland Security, including Secret Service, and information about Butler, but they have not allowed him to publish it yet. I think that information needs to come forward. You may have seen that last week in the Senate, especially when Kristi Noem was being interrogated. Was it Tom Tillis, Senator Tillis? One of them asked her about the Kafari probe and what is going on with that. But I think that there's more information there about what's been going on with our TSA as well as with the Secret Service. But thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I really appreciate it.